Hello, Garland Nixon here, and let's have a little conversation about President Trump's meeting with Zelensky and what that means. Let's talk. Hello, all Garland here, and as you probably know by now, President Trump and Ukrainian President, I'll use that word charitably, President Zelensky met today. And, one of the telling things, those of us who understand the conflict have said for a while that, Ukraine's not a country. It's a concentration camp, that countries don't kidnap their own people, beat them, throw them in vans, and send them to the front to die. But that's what they do in Ukraine. And unfortunately for Ukrainians, you don't have a lot of alternatives at this point. Zelensky, apparently, a little bit of quick background. President Zelensky, prior to the meeting, apparently took the 28-point plan, or how many points were on this plan, whittled it down to 20 points that he felt benefited him, Ukraine, or that the Europeans felt benefited Europe, and particularly the British Empire, and said, okay, I've got a 20-point proposal. And when Donald Trump was asked about it, he made a very revealing comment, very revealing. When asked by the media, Zelensky has a 20-point plan, and Trump's answer was, he has nothing until I approve it. Now, I would say that was revealing for this point. Those of us who said, come on now, it's a proxy war, this is a puppet state, they have no power, Zelensky has no power. What did Donald Trump say again? Vladimir Zelensky has nothing until I approve it. Let me ask you this. Is anybody saying that about Russia? Is anybody saying President Putin has made a decision on the military, but he has nothing until it's approved by Xi Jinping, Modi, Smodi, Bodhi, whoever the hell? No, nobody is saying that the Russians have to approve anything. The Russians are a world power, and they got nukes, and they don't have to approve a damn thing with nobody. They do the approving. Now, as you know, my point is this. China does the approving, the United States does the approving, and Russia does the approving. Those are the three world powers. They're the ones that do the approving in the world, and everybody else has to get things approved, okay? Simple as that. If China wants to crush your economy, if they want to put a hurt on your economy, they can. If Russia wants to, they can. If the U.S. wants to, they can. But generally, Russia and China don't do that kind of stuff. They don't. But at any rate, let me continue. By the way, we've got a guy here saying, voice is breaking all the time. I'll simply say this. I don't see it with anybody else. If anybody else has a problem with my voice breaking, let me know. Or it could be that poor E. Dane may simply have some problems of his own. So anybody else has any problems with sound, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, we will endeavor to persevere. All right, let's continue. So here's where we are. Things are looking as they're looking, and let's touch base with the news and see let's start and see what's happening in the West, what's being said in the West, and then we can go to what's being here's what we'll do. Let's see what we can find. I've already done a little bit of looking. Let's see if we can find some narratives in maybe England, some narratives maybe in the US, etc. Okay, let's keep going, and we're going to start in England. Or I don't know where the hell this is. Let's start here. Well, the Russians got big problems. Vladimir Putin health update. The Russian president is battling multiple illnesses. His health, as reports claim, is dealing with multiple medical conditions. Do you think that's bad? Look all the way down here. Look. A number of external sources have indicated he's got neurological disorders, cancer-related complications, Parkinson's disease, movement diseases, tremors, stiffness, abnormal posture, blah, blah, blah. So let's start with this. Let's start with this. poor old Vladimir Zelensky. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, the poor fellow. He's suffering, as we know. And let me tell you, he's a tough guy, because at the beginning of the war, I read that he's got, let's see, brain cancer, stomach cancer, Parkinson's disease, and dementia, right? So from my perspective, if you can make it 4 years with all of that, you got to be a pretty tough guy. So let's start there. According to the media, poor old Vladimir Putin has one foot in the grave and another on a patch of ice. So boy, well, I guess the Russians might as well give up, huh? I mean, President Putin has neurological disorders, Parkinson's, and cancer, and God only knows what else. I'm sure he has probably like trench foot, cavities, you name it, he's a goner. So that's an easy one. I'm shocked to find out what the terrible health conditions of Vladimir Putin. But let's see how things are going. Maybe, perhaps, the Russians are at least holding their own in the fight. You think the Russians maybe are holding their own? Oh, no, they're not. Doggone it. We got it right here. Humiliation for Putin as brutal Russian death count revealed. A new report of the, let's see, I'm sure this came from a very, very reliable, reputable source. A new report by the General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces reveals the estimated number of soldiers Russia has lost since February 2022, right? Oh my God, today's Sunday, the 28th. No wonder Vladimir Zelensky was meeting with Trump to celebrate the humiliation of Russia. That's what's going on now. Russia is facing complete and total humiliation. And from the looks of things, we want to see the numbers. I'm pretty horrified, I'm afraid. I know some Russians. They're probably all gone by now. Russia has lost more than 1 million soldiers since its full-scale invasion. Not a special military operation. Complete, total, absolute, all-out war, on a war footing, the entire country of Russia. And they have lost more than 1 million soldiers, according to a new report. The General Staff of Ukraine says that Moscow has lost 1.2 million Russia soldiers. They've also lost 11,400 tanks, 23,831 armored vehicles, 71,000 vehicles, 35,000 artillery systems, 1,500 multiple launch rocket systems. I didn't know they had 35,000 artillery systems. I thought they, anyway, 12,000 air defense systems, 12,000 air defense systems, 434 planes, 347 helicopters, 96,000 drones, 4,136 cruise missiles. And if you follow the Ukrainians, you'll know that they probably fired 4,000 cruise missiles. Based on the normal reports by Ukraine, the Russians have fired 4,000 cruise missiles, and the Ukrainians have shot down 4,136. So they've lost 4,136 cruise missiles. Interesting. What do you mean by lost? In that they fired them into Ukraine and they blew up their target? If you want to take that perspective, I think that's accurate. 4,000 missiles, they fired them in, they hit their targets, and they blew up. I guess you can consider those lost. And on and on and on. 28 ships. Russians, they're pretty much fleet, 2 subs. So their fleet has been wiped out. The poor Russians, there you go. Now, you think that's bad. Before we get to this meeting, I got to tell you, the Russians are in deep and serious trouble, and you really need to know. So before you understand why Vladimir Zelensky was meeting, you've got to understand how bad the situation is for the Russians, and it is bleak. Cancer and various other illnesses for Zelensky, 1.2 million soldiers gone. And this is the worst part. Starving Russian soldiers recorded plotting to eat fellow troops. They're so out of food. They're just looking at each other saying, man, it's like an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where they would look at each other like they're marooned on a desert island. And one guy looks at the other and says, and the guy like turns into a drumstick or a hot dog or something, and he bites his buddy. There you go. That's bad. And this guy, Luke Alsford, granted, he's 15, maybe 13, but he sure knows the stuff about the Russians, huh? They're starved. They're recorded plotting to eat fellow troops. There's a guy. He's probably too late for him now. He's already eaten, no doubt. Maybe in this little trunk beside him. I guess there's the knives that he's going to use to carve up his buddies. And they're all done. Eat your buddies. Keep on going. They're going to eat the younger henchmen. The younger ones especially. Those are the tender ones. So if you're going to eat your fellow troops, make sure you get the young ones because they're nice and tender. Put a little bit of rosemary on them, maybe some hot sauce. There you go. And you got I don't know, and you put them in some beet soup and you have Russian borscht soup or something. For God's sake. And last but not least, if you thought that was bad, here's the final nail in the coffin for the Russians. Before we get to this meeting, you got to understand how bad it is for the Russians. Putin on the brink as Russian leaders face major internal revolt. Patience has run out. The despot is coming under intense pressure from elite factions who've grown tired of the war in Ukraine. That's according to John Barger. There you go. Look at the look on Putin's face. He's horrified. He's under pressure from the business elites. There you go. Facing a major revolt from Russia's big business elites who have seen sales plunge to their lowest level since the 1998 crisis. A lethal combination of tightening sanctions, rising interest rates, a sharp economic slowdown that pushed Russia's industry to the brink of catastrophe. Unlike German industry, who's never been better. French, the UK, I'm telling you, they're rich men. Some of Russia's major industrial companies say sales are the worst since the ruble devaluation fiasco of 27 years ago. There we go. They're done. They're in trouble. Hyperinflation of 84%. I was just there 3 weeks ago in Russia, and there was an 84% hyperinflation, which is even worse because that shows that all of this stuff has happened in the last 3 weeks since I left. 3 weeks, absolute and total crash. So it looks to me like things are looking bleak for the Russians, and we just got to figure this thing out, right? Let's see what else we can find. Okay, so they met, and let's see what the Hill has to say about the meeting. Let's take a look at the Hill. President Trump projected optimism going into his meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, telling reporters he expects to make progress, right? Standing next to Zelensky on Sunday, Trump said he believes both the Ukrainian leader and the Russian President Putin want to achieve peace. All right. Yeah. I believe we have the makings of a deal that's good for Ukraine, good for everybody. And that's very important. There's nothing more important in my book. Good for Ukraine, good for everybody. Okay, it's good for Ukraine in that if they get a deal, the Russians will stop blowing Ukraine to hell and taking more and more Ukraine. But I have a funny feeling that Vladimir Zelensky knows that if he does such a thing, he's going to go home and they're going to put a rope around his stinking neck and throw the other side over a tree branch. But we shall see. He also said he thinks Putin is serious about making peace with Ukraine, despite Russian attacks on Ukraine shortly before Sunday's meeting. Trump's President Putin is serious about making peace. And by making peace, I mean by winning the war. Peace through winning the war. You know what I mean? For instance, peace through, I'm thinking this, an unconditional surrender would be peace, wouldn't it? So I think the Russians are moving swiftly across the battle lines towards peace. Let us continue. He praised Zelensky for his bravery and work on a draft peace proposal. Great job there on this thing. And if we run out of toilet paper, we got your draft peace proposal. Kind of serves the thing. It serves the same case. We're going to get it done, Trump said. We're going to have a great meeting today. This gentleman has worked very hard and he's very brave and his people are very brave. What they've gone through, no nation, very, very rarely has a nation ever had to go through this. For instance, getting attacked by the Nazis and losing 27 million people. That's an option. I mean, if you want to look at maybe nations who've been through this before in one way or the other, except in this instance, there were actual Nazis in Ukraine. He noted he plans to call Putin back after the meeting with Zelensky. All right, so there we go. That's pre-meeting. And let's get going and see what we got here. Let's go to Russian media and see what we can find. Kremlin reveals details of Putin-Trump call. So let's see what the Russians, the evil Russians. Putin probably can't have much to say because he's, of course, getting treatment for Parkinson's and cancer. Trench foot. He's probably getting maybe some drilling done in his teeth. They're bad. I'm sure he's got a detached retina, hair loss, and various other things, right? He's getting treated for ED and boils on his behind. So he doesn't really have time to get involved in this. He demands of just an absolute a basket case when it comes to his health. All right. U.S. President Donald Trump called his Russian counterpart on Sunday to discuss a number of issues related to the Ukraine peace talks. Now, this is according to Yuri Ushakov. He's a Kremlin foreign policy aide. All right. Two presidents had a, quote, friendly, well-wishing, and business-like conversation. It lasted for 1 hour and 15 minutes. They expressed mutual interest in reaching a lasting peaceful settlement in the Ukraine. That's important. That's important. Putin stressed the need to rely on, now, and this is critical, Putin stressed the need to rely on the understandings reached between the presidents at the summit in Anchorage this year. Both the Russian and the U.S. leaders agreed. Here we go. And this is critical, even though Russia's going to have to smash Ukraine to pieces anyway. But it's critical that this narrative remains active and that people understand this. Both the Russians and the U.S. leaders agreed that a temporary ceasefire, as proposed by Ukraine and its European backers, quote, would only prolong the conflict and risk a resumption of hostilities. I think I'm the one with all of the diseases that they're saying that Putin has, according to the Kremlin aide, Yuri Ushakov. Now, here's what's important about that. It's important if you remember the Anchorage meeting, and they came out, and Trump had been like, yeah, it's a ceasefire, and we're going to stop this, and we're along the contact line. And he came out and he says, yeah, we got to address the root causes. So you see, if you say address the root causes, or if you say that you have to have something that if we understand that a temporary ceasefire would only prolong the conflict and risk of resumption of his hostilities, you said the same thing. It's the Russians saying, look, the Ukraine project is over. Not only are we going to defeat Ukraine, we're going to defeat the Ukraine project. We understand that the Ukraine project is a long-term project to weaken, destroy, and dismember and take over Russia. That ain't happening, and we will fight to make sure it doesn't happen. Not going to happen. You're not putting it on hold. You're not going to say time out. You're not going to say Minsk 3, 4, 5, 2, 1. That's not happening. Root causes, no cessation of hostilities. The only thing that we will do accept is this: we will end this thing once and for all. That means that either on the battlefield or in acceptance, right? Full acceptance, Ukraine must be, this Ukraine project against Russia will be defeated. And as Barack Obama, you got to say this about Obama. You have to say this about Obama for all he's just, what people said. And I've said this. He was, a blackface for Wall Street. That's all he was. You know what I mean? He was a guy, Wall Street said, oh, we can find a person of color, blah, 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 and put him out there. And then we can do the same dirt we've been doing. And we'll have a guy out, Wall Street, City of London, etc. And we'll stick him out there and put people asleep. And they'll think, oh, there's a black guy. I guess he must be different. No, he wasn't. But let me say this. For all the, what's the word I'm looking for? Bad things Barack Obama did. Here's what I'll say about Barack Obama. He wasn't stupid. He was a very smart guy. Diabolical and evil, fair enough. But he was smart. And what did he say? He said, no matter basically how much force we use in no matter how much force that we use in Ukraine, the Russians will always be able to come up with more, right? No matter what, in various ways. He also said it will be existential to the Russians, but not for us. The truth is, here's a truth that you have to look at. When Donald Trump says, if I was president, the war wouldn't have started. The truth is, if Barack Obama was president, the war wouldn't start, because Obama refused to arm Ukraine. So for all of the diabolical, evil things that we can say about Obama, the truth is that he understood the Ukraine conflict, and he said things that showed that he understood the Ukraine conflict. That's reality. Okay. So now the Ukraine project has spectacularly failed. It has been a catastrophic, a full spectrum defeat, because it was a full spectrum attack to take out Russia. It was diplomatic attack. What did they say? We're going to isolate Russia. That meant diplomatically, we're going to go out and we're going to pressure people to side with us or Russia. And of course, they'll all side with us. It was an economic attack more than anything else. What does it mean? It means that what we're going to do is we're going to economically put massive sanctions on Russia and destroy them. It was military. Okay, while we're going to do these other things, we're also going to have a military attack on the Russians. And the Russians will be in deep and serious trouble because there will be a military attack on them and they won't be able to deal with that. Right. So all in all, it was full spectrum, economic, military, you name it, anything we can think of, we're using it to attack the Russians. Okay. And if you launch a full spectrum attack and you lose, that means it's a full spectrum loss. They lost in that the Russians are economically stronger than they were before, and they have stronger economic ties to their partners. They lost diplomatically because the Russians have more friends than we do now. And a lot of countries just, if they had to make a decision between the US and the Russians, they said, we'll pick the Russians. If they were forced to make a decision, they chose the Russians. Why? Because it benefited them economically. We lost diplomatically. Why? Because Europe is a basket case and it's falling apart. When your country, when your bloc is run by Kaja Kallas and von der Leyen, you lost before you started. That's the reality. They lost before they started. They stuck a couple of goose-stepping fascist Nazis in charge and thought that nobody would notice and thought they wouldn't screw things up. Hey, who are you going to put in charge? Well, what do we got over there? There's Kaja Kallas. Goose stepping around. Hey, I got an idea. How about her? How about Field Marshal Kallas? So they put Field Marshal Kallas in von der Leyen. The Russians, we will defeat them, right? They put these people in charge. Gee, I wonder how that's going to work out. I think we know. So meanwhile, through British and in some instances U.S. manipulation, they kept in the Mr. BlackRock. Let's look. You got a guy who's from BlackRock in charge of Germany. You got a guy who's from Rothschild's bank in charge of France. And you thought this was going to work out well for the people. You thought this was going to be a great idea. This is speculative finance capital. This war is, as most wars in this day and age, this war is pushed by finance speculative capital, which would be what? Which would be the City of London and Wall Street. If you want to know who's behind this war, where's Merritt from? BlackRock. Where's Macron from? Rothschilds. Where's Steyer from? What's his name? The friggin' Starmer. Who the hell knows? He doesn't exist, which means he's owned by the City of London, right? So ultimately, what do you have here? You got speculative capital. That's all. Now, that does explain why they're trying to get more money into Ukraine now, because they know this is the end. And what do speculative capital entities do when they have a company that's about to fail? They take over a company, and they're doing whatever they're going to do with the company, and they realize the company's going to crash in 6 months. What do? They extract every dime of equity from that company times 100. If they understand that a company is going to fail, if you want to understand what they're doing to Ukraine, they're doing what they do, finance capital does to a company that they have acquired when they realize it's going to crash. Oh no, people come to them and they say, we've looked at the market and this company sells widgets and the widget market is done. This company's done in 6 months. They say, here's what we're going to do. How much, what kind of credit do they have? They got good credit. They can borrow 10 billion, borrow all 10, but they'll never pay it back. Hell, they'll be out of business in a year anyway. 6 months out, borrow 10 billion. What else do they have? Oh, they got a lot of employees, lay them off so we can keep the money, but we won't be able to make anything. Who cares? We're out of business in 6 months anyway. See what I'm saying? They look at it. Do they have any money in the bank? Yeah, they got $10 billion in the bank. Take every dime of it out, transfer it to our accounts and charge them for consultant fees. You see what I'm saying? What they do, what finance speculative capital does, when they see that a venture is about to crash, they extract all the equity that they can from it before it crashes, and then they go bankrupt. Okay? So clearly, they're looking at Ukraine saying, it's out of here. It's done. It's finished. What would you expect them to do now to extract all the equity they can? The ATM's about to close. So what do they want to do? They tried to get the Russian money. Why? To help Ukraine? Hell no. Because they thought it would make Ukraine last another year. No, they know Ukraine ain't gonna last another year. It was, we got $230 billion or 300, 140, however much is left that they haven't stolen. Here's what we do. We set that up to go to Ukraine, right? And then we steal every dime of it, and then Ukraine falls. Well, what happens if we don't do that? Then Ukraine falls. They got months left. Ukraine's gone by midsummer, right? Yeah. Well, we might as well get our hands on a couple $100 billion before they go. That's the way they work. And that's what's going on now. If you don't understand this, all this bull crap that they're doing is simply this. How can we steal as much as we can before the kitty closes? All right, let me continue. Putin agreed to a proposal from Trump to continue the settlement process, you love this, by forming 2 working groups to tackle security and economic issues, Ushakov said. Well, 2 things. Numero uno, that's professional. That's how the Russians do, what's the word I'm looking for? Negotiations, right? Professional. What are you going to do? We're going to put working groups. We're going to have issues. Each working group are going to have assignments. It's very bureaucratic, but it's also very professional. Diplomats do that. Groups and this and that, and you work out things and you do all of that. And then and in the end, the leaders of the country sign off on them. So to be frank, let's be honest, the Americans and the Russians are talking about professional, even though it's led by the Russians, fair enough. But what they're talking about is professional diplomacy, wherein the 2 sides do things in a traditional professional manner and work out some kind of a document that everybody can sign off on. Ain't gonna work, but the Russians are at least making an effort to do it right, as they smash the stinking Ukrainians to pieces, like you do if you're the Red Army. That's what you do. Okay. And not only that, it takes time, but here's the bottom line. The Trump people are in a corner and they want to end this thing as quickly as possible, but they're just not going to be able to. They want a quick solution. They want to, go out on TV and say, hooray, let's make a big proclamation. Trump wants to effectively stand on an aircraft carrier with a mission accomplished sign behind him, but this is not going to happen. That ain't the way the Russians do things. It's not overnight. It's not today. It is. We're going to do things in a professional manner. Why? Because it's long-term. It's existential. And the Russians are saying, when we conclude this thing, we ain't going to be worried about somebody coming at us through Ukraine again. One way or the other. If you're wise, you'll work out a deal to make sure that happens. If you're not, you'll keep fighting and we'll keep fighting. But it ain't going to happen. It's up to you. Oh, by the way, we're winning, in case you hadn't noticed. All right. Trump wrote in a True Social post. He had a very productive conversation with Putin. Friday, Zelensky told Axios he anticipates reaching an agreement on a peace framework. Okay, so here's where we are. Before Zelensky went to meet with Trump, he stopped in Canada and they gave him some more money. Why? Because if somebody put money can't build weapons when you don't have the minerals. Absolutely. But they don't want weapons. They want the money. You know what I mean? So I agree with you because they get all these money. They get all of this money. And even if they have the money and then they come to the U.S. and say, can we buy weapons? The U.S. says, yeah, but we can't deliver until 2034. But give us the money anyway. You never seen that money back and you never seen the weapons. But the money ain't for weapons, because if they get $1 billion per se, Zelensky gets $1 billion. When that $1 billion gets back to Kiev, everybody's getting their fair share. You know what I mean? Everybody, before it leaves Canada, the Canadian crooks are getting their fair share. And God knows when it gets to Kiev, they're jumping like a bunch of rats fighting over a piece of cheese. And when they get finished, there's a couple $100 million left to send to Lockheed Martin in the pretense that you're buying weapons. It's all being stolen. It's all over. All right, let's continue. There's another very, very telling, and this is, you've probably heard of this guy, as Kirill, as Mark Sloboda calls him, Kirill. I like the dark Budanov. Now, who is Kirill Budanov? Kirill Budanov is a leader of the SBU, I think it's called, or is it the GUU? I don't know what the hell it is. It's the CIA and MI6 is what it is. But at any rate, he is ostensibly the leader of the intelligence agencies for Ukraine. Well, everybody knows the intelligence agencies for Ukraine. That's basically, in a nutshell, the MI6 and or the CIA, right? So here's what he says. Kiev needs to engage in talks with Moscow. The head of Ukraine's military intelligence, Kirill Budanov, has said negotiations are simply unavoidable for the ongoing conflict between the two nations to end. Right. So he says, it's time we got to talk with to Moscow. Negotiations are unavoidable. That's what he says. Simply unavoidable, not just unavoidable. It's very simple. It's obvious, right? You could use the word obvious, unavoidable. What does he mean? If you're losing a war, it is unavoidable. If you're winning, it's not unavoidable. You don't need to negotiate if you're winning. If you're getting your butt kicked, it is unavoidable. It's unavoidable for the losers. You don't hear the Russians saying, it's unavoidable that we negotiate or engage in talks. No, they say, what has President Putin said recently? Look. Oh, and might I add, if you look back, because I covered this at the beginning of the conflict, he had a phone call with Rothschild Macron, in which he said, look, either we will accomplish the goals of the special military operation through diplomacy or force of arms. Recently, he had another press conference or something, and in that press conference, you know what he said? We will accomplish the goals of the special military operation either through diplomacy or force of arms. Either. It doesn't matter. Would they prefer diplomacy? Oh, sure, maybe. But force of arms means they take what they want. What is it? Vi victus or something? Latin. Woe to the vanquished. In other words, there was who was it? There was a famous Greek or guy who said, he said, the strong do what they must and the weak suffer, or the strong do what they can or what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. Look, in reality, on the battlefield, on the geopolitical landscape, you can negotiate with people. You have leverage, things like that. But in the end, if you get in conflict with a greater power, you got problems. And your best bet is to negotiate a deal, because when it comes down to it, woe to the vanquished, and the weak suffer what they must. And if you go head to head with a world power, and there's exactly three, you won't have a problem. But keep in mind, there are regional powers that are strong enough to inflict pain even on the world powers. Could they be destroyed? Yes, but they could give hell on the world powers enough that the world powers, it wouldn't be worth it. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, you may win a fight, but it ain't worth it. You're going to walk away too bloody. For instance, Iran. If the U.S. decided to go with Iran, could the U.S. nuke Iran or this or that or whatever, right? But Iran's going to close off the Straits of Hormuz. Iran's going to flatten bases all over the place. Oh, by the way, Iran's going to flatten all the oil infrastructure in the Middle East and detonate the derivatives market. And that's it for the Western economy. In particular, the U.S. economy is shot. That's it for the city of London. That's it. So could you do serious damage to Iran? Yeah, but it wouldn't be worth your while. That's what a regional power can do. A regional power can say, you can hurt me, but it won't be worth your while. For instance, I've always said the only thing I need to be able to do from a self-defense perspective is, if you put me in a corner, I need to be able to get out of that corner, right? And I need you to think to yourself, or to know, I may be able to defeat Garland, but it ain't going to be worth my while, because it's going to hurt. Yes, maybe I can win, but that son of a gun's going to try to gouge my eyes, strike my groin. He's going to try to bite me, scratch me, hit me with everything. He's a sick, psychotic madman. If I put him into a corner, it ain't going to be worth it. I may win, but I'm going to walk away with too much pain. That's a strength that one could have. There are a lot of animals that face larger animals, and the animal faces it off, and they look at the little animal and they're like, I can probably win this. He's going to tear me a new one. He's going to rip my snoot up. He's going to gouge me. I could face a devastating injury. And in the wild, if you are an animal and you get a really severe injury and you're not unable to hunt, or you're able to run and defend yourself, and you're not 100%, you're a dead man. So my point being, if you get exposed as weak. So my point being, on the international scale, when it comes down to it, if there isn't the ultimate conflict, it comes down to who has the monopoly on violence, who has the monopoly, the kinetic ability to either dominate their opponents or deter an attack from their opponents. right now, right? And where we are is Ukraine can do neither. Ukraine can neither dominate the Russia nor deter attacks from Russia, nor prevent a defeat from Russia, which means, as I've said over and over, they are at a point. They're at that point. They're at that point in a chess game when both people look and they say, checkmate. There's 3, 5, 10 more moves we can make. If I do this, he goes here. If I do that, he goes there. If I do this, everywhere I go, I'm set. I'm going to lose. Then he's going to take this guy, and he's going to do, I'm done. There's no way out for me. The game's not technically over. But everybody who knows anything about chess looks at the game and knows defeat is inevitable. Resistance is futile, as the board would say, right? But Budanov's statement that Kiev needs to engage in talks with Moscow. Needs to, not should, not want. Needs to engage in talks with Moscow. Negotiations are unavoidable. Think about it. Needs, unavoidable. That is the language. You know, I like to do this from my law enforcement days and investigation days of statement analysis. When someone says they need to engage with Moscow, when someone says that negotiations are unavoidable, that is the language of defeat. That's what that is. That is those are the sounds that Sun Tzu said. That's the noise before defeat. That's all it is, nothing more. Let me look and see. I like to look at the Russian stuff. So what the Russians, the Russians are so businesslike, right? They retain what's the word I'm going to look for? They retain the bureaucratic nature of the bureaucratic culture of the Soviet Union, right? And here's what they say. Okay, according to Yushikov, this is what. So here's what the Russians are reporting about the conversation. Guess you need what to know. How the Russians are reporting it. Ready? Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. leader Donald Trump held their 9th telephone conversation this year. This is the Russians' perspective on it, and I think it's important to evaluate that. According to Yuri Ushakov, they discussed the situation in Ukraine, straightforward, and prospects for cooperations between the two countries prior to Trump's meeting. Cooperation between the two countries, that doesn't just say the war, does it? The president's also agreed to speak after the talks. Okay, TASS has compiled details of the phone call between the Russian and U.S. leaders. Well, I think it's important that we go over that. This is what the Russians are reporting, and they are reporting the following details of the phone call. U.S. initiative. Trump was the first to announce the conversation. Quote, I just had a good and very productive telephone call with President Putin of Russia prior to my meeting at 1 p.m. today with President Zelensky of Ukraine, he wrote. So Trump admitted, I talked to Putin first. I think that's powerful. Here's why. Because again, it reiterates the reality that the U.S. is a world power, that Russia is a world power, and Ukraine ain't. And before I meet with this putz, before I meet with this schlub, I'm going to talk to the real. Before we bring in the kids, the men got to talk, right? The adults have to talk. But then I'm going to talk to the kids. Okay, little Zelensky here, play with this toy, squeeze this toy. I think I got a toy for him. There we go. I got a toy for him. I think you'll like this little toy. It was given to me in Moscow. Isn't that a cute little toy? I think we should have one for Zelensky. So Trump had a little stuffed toy for Zelensky, but before he gave him his stuffed toy, the men, the adults had to talk in the room, right? Okay. The two leaders agreed to speak again by phone soon after the U.S. president's meeting with the Ukrainian team in Mar-a-Lago. So prior to it, the adults talked. Hey, I'm going to talk to this schlep. Oh, you're talking to that schlub? Yeah, moron, that clown, that idiot. Oh my God, I feel sorry for you, Don. Having to talk to that guy. Yeah, he's a real freaking loser. But okay, I'll get back with you in an hour. Hey, tell everybody, tell the wife and kids I said I'd talk to you soon. All right. Then he goes and talks to, in comes Zelensky. Oh, I have a 20-point plan, and we're going to defeat the Russians. Yeah, whatever. Get this guy some water. All right, go ahead, clown face. Oh, yes, we must defeat the Russians, and I got a 20-point plan. By the way, another $1 billion, maybe 20. Get out of here. I'm calling Putin. That's kind of that's how it works. Okay. According to Ushakov, during the conversation, Trump acknowledged that the Ukrainian crisis had been the most challenging for him, adding he was once again convinced of Russia's commitment to a political and diplomatic resolution. That's important. It's important because the narrative of the neocons is that the Russians are not good faith actors, that the Russians are just violent, crazy Slavic madmen that just want to kill everybody. Putin's a madman. He can't be reasoned with. He just wants to murder and kill and blah, blah, blah. And what is Trump saying? He's saying what he thinks. Yeah, I think the Russians are ready to make a move. Why does he say that? Because he wants to move. And the Russians are fine. I put it like this. If I'm trying to sell you this used car and I want 1,000 for this used car, and I say I can't take a penny under 1,000, and we talk, well, Garland's doing well, we've got a good deal, and Garland said, yeah, we're working towards the deal, and Garland says, yes, well, Garland's already told you got to get $1,000. We're working, we're talking, but if you don't get to $1,000, you don't get a deal. That's what I want from that car. Anyway, the call lasted an hour and 15 minutes. The two leaders agreed to speak again by phone. Okay, settlement working groups. That's important. That's Russian bureaucratic and diplomatic and professional diplomacy. According to Ushakov, during the conversation, Trump acknowledged that the Ukrainian crisis had been the most challenging. President Putin agreed with the U.S. proposal to continue seeking a settlement in Ukraine through listen to this. Whoa. Agreed with the U.S. proposal. Interesting. So the Russians agreed with the U.S. proposal to continue seeking a settlement in Ukraine through two specially established working groups. One of the teams will address security issues while the other will focus on economic matters. The schedule for launching these working groups will be finalized soon, likely in early January. That's professional. I'm okay with that. That's very professional. Kiev should make bold decision. This is the next step. This is what I'm giving you now for those who just came in. These are this is the Russian report on the phone call between Trump and Putin. Let me continue. According to the Kremlin aide, to finally end the hostilities, quote, Kiev needs to make a bold and responsible political decision in line with the efforts carried out by Russia and the U.S., unquote. Given the current situation, quote again, given the current situation on the front lines, it would make sense for the Ukrainian authorities to adopt this decision regarding Donbass without delay, right? So what are they saying? You're losing Donbass. For starters, it would make sense to you to get the hell out of Donbass and give it up. That's all he's saying. Look, hey, man, I'm just trying to be reasonable here. You're losing Donbass. Get the hell out. That's part of it. That's something that we can work with. We've already said if you get out of Donbass, get the hell out. All that. The Russians have said, we will not attack your troops. If they get out, if you get out and move about, we're not going to fire on them. Let them get out. That's reasonable. The Russians have said, we're taking Eastern Ukraine. It's ours. Nothing you can do about it. And and it's not exactly a ceasefire, as it were, because what they're saying is, this is mine. Get out of my area. I ain't got to shoot at you. That would be a start. And here's the other thing: getting out of Donbass is an acknowledgement that you lost the war. It's an acknowledgement that the Russians have a right to a security zone, and you can go from there. All right. The diplomat also noted that, quote, the presidents of Russia and the United States generally share the view, listen to this, that a temporary ceasefire proposed by the Ukrainians and Europeans, whether to prepare for a referendum or other reasons, such as prepare for eventual fighting again. Anyway, but I add that in. My addition and emphasis, quote, would only prolong the conflict and could lead to a resumption of hostilities. That means they must address the root causes. The Russians keep getting back to it. You ain't going to continue this war. This is not going to happen. You came to our border, and either you address the root causes or we address the root causes. It's up to you. Right now, we're addressing the root causes. If you'd like to work with us, fine. If not, it is what it is. Russia-U.S. cooperation projects. This should be interesting. The conversation also addressed the future prospects for relations between Moscow and Washington once the Ukrainian crisis is resolved. Quote, Donald Trump emphasized that the war must end as soon as possible, highlighting the impressive prospects for economic cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, as well as with Ukraine that could then emerge, Ushakov said. Now, that is leverage for the Russians, right? Friendly chat, the Kremlin official noted that the presidents exchanged warm greetings for Christmas and New Year and wished happiness to the peoples of both countries. The entire conversation was friendly, positive, practical, with both sides eager to work toward a peaceful long-term resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. So that is how the Russians have reported it. Putin agrees to U.S. proposal for settlement in framework of working groups. So they make it clear. The Americans came up with an idea for two working groups, one on security matters, one on economic matters. And of course, the economic matters are for what happens after the conflict. Because I believe, based on a number of things, and a lot of other people do, that the Trump administration sees the Russians and sees Russia as a tremendous opportunity for economic growth for the United States, as a way for the U.S. to, help dig itself out. I don't know if it is or not. I don't know if they could ever be. I don't know what they can do, or if it ever happens. But we do know that that's leverage that Russia has, and Russia doesn't want to leave that. Let's see. The Russians are reporting that let's see that the Kiev, the Ukrainians are firing a bunch of their leaders. That doesn't really mean anything, tell you the truth. Well, let's see what they're saying. Let's look at the Kiev Post. I want to see, lastly, but not, let's see. Let's see what they're saying in Kiev. U.S. President Donald Trump said he had this is the Kiev Post, which is which is American funded and everything. Had a good and productive phone call with Putin in a True Social post. He had a productive meeting. Okay. Let's see. Ushakov, they had a friendly. Let me see if I can't really find anything. As the meeting kicked off, Trump confirmed he would hold another call with Putin after talks. The U.S. president described Putin as very serious about peace. Call between Putin and Trump is likely to spark concerns in an already fraught moment as Zelensky gears up for his third U.S. meeting this year. Although Zelensky had signaled optimism at the prospects of the weapons being supplied, and Trump himself had refused to rule it out. After the call with his Russian counterpart, the U.S. president's stance appeared to shift. Now you'll notice that. Oh, after he talked with Putin, then all of a sudden he turned into a Putin bot, right? Let me see. They're going to the past. So I don't see anything. It's a pile of crap, if you want the truth. Let's see. I don't see much else. I don't see a whole lot else. It looks like the Kiev Post. If I search one more time, Trump, Zelensky meeting, see if I can find anything else before we go. I don't see much else. One thing they're doing a lot of, doggone it, just to see if anything's changed. Not much. Oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be wonderful. Donald Trump backs down to Vladimir Putin and opposes Ukraine's ceasefire demand. He backs down. A Russian official has claimed Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have both agreed in their opposition to a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine. This is British. Made the comments after Trump and Putin shared a phone call. Ushkov said Trump and Putin agreed that a temporary ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire would instead prolong the conflict. Anything else? So Trump backs down because he faces the reality. Because the reality is this: if the Russians say we ain't going to do a ceasefire, right? How can Trump not agree that it'll prolong the conflict if you want to end the conflict and the side that's winning says, look, well, I'm not going to do a ceasefire. So if you want to end this conflict, we got to the root causes. And you say, okay, well, I can't get them to accept the ceasefire. I accept that. The only way we're going to do it is elsewise, right? Is some other thing other than the ceasefire. At that point, are you backing down? If you accept the inevitability, if you accept reality, is it a back down? Yes, it is. If it's a British newspaper. Let's see. We got anything in the Washington Post? Washington Post, Trump, Zelensky. News, best day. That's weird. I'm not getting anything. Everything's 1 year ago, 2 years ago. Okay, the Washington Post. Let's see what they got. Trump meets Zelensky at Mar-a-Lago. I love this. Between Putin phone calls. Who wrote this? Oh, a bunch of people. I don't have deadlines. Trump brushed off concerns that Putin wasn't serious. After little to show for previous summits with Putin in Alaska in August and Zelensky in Washington in October, Trump waved off any more in-person meetings until he viewed a resolution as closer to fruition. This time, Zelensky is presenting a 20-point plan. Let's see. And they put together this stupid plan. Putin has repeatedly rejected proposals for ceasefires. Yeah. And refused to meet with Zelensky. False. Who he claims is an illegitimate leader. True. Since launching the war, he has shown no interest in moving off his core demands. True. Including the seizure of large swaths of Ukraine. True. So there we go. That's easy. That's done with. I wonder if we look at social media. So I will end, my dear and fluffy friends, by looking at social media for you and see if we got anything new popping up. Let's find the latest thing we can. Let's see. I don't see anything. Trump, Zelensky. Nah, they just say it was substantive. Still very meaningful. Yeah. I don't see anything of consequence. I see nothing. I see nothing. I know nothing. I hear nothing. All right, let's look. All right, we are looking through. We are looking through Telegram. Media reports that the call between Zelensky, his European Emotional Support Club, and Trump has concluded. Okay, so apparently, Trump and Zelensky talked to the what do you call it? The Chihuahuas, and I'm sure they had plenty to say. I think that's it. I don't see anything else. Here's one. Poland's prime minister sent a short message of support before he met Trump, like he might not make it out of Mar-a-Lago. I can't. I don't see anything. Okay, I think that's it. Somebody brings up Hunter Biden, and I think that's of consequence. Hunter Biden has recently come out saying, now this is going to shock you. Let's see, Biden, Ukraine. He's been out running his mouth. Hunter Biden blames let's see. Hunter Biden says it was an absolutely mistake to join the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden's been coming out lately saying, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of corruption there in Ukraine." Well, there's a guy that would know, isn't it? There's a guy. If you got to give Hunter Biden credit, if anybody would know that there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine, it's Hunter Biden, because God knows he got his fair share. One last place to check. Russian victories across the front warrant sign. Now this is the last thing I'll touch on. And if you've been paying any attention, this is important. The Russian victories across the front warning sign across the front warning sign for Zelensky: make peace or be destroyed. In fact, someone else recently said that what's his name? That if Zelensky has to watch it, that he end up done for. The liberation of Dimitrov in Donetsk, Guyapole, and Stepnogorsk in Zaporozhye, and new areas in Kharkov are significant in their own right, but even more so in terms of their impact on peace talks, right? Victories create a new additional factor against Kiev regime's position. The further west Russia pushes, the more trump cards it will have in negotiations. Guyapole is the second largest settlement in the region, very important fortified area. Its capture opens the door to Russian advancers in both Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk. Dimitrov, part of the Krasnoarmysk agglomeration, these words, until recently one of the last major fortified areas under Ukraine's control in the Donbass. Its liberation leaves Russia at the gates of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. The victories are even more impressive considering the saturation of drone coverage, which makes fighting and movement difficult, but which Russia's military is overcoming by achieving air superiority and suppressing enemy UAV capabilities. The advances show that no matter how many more useless scraps of paper disguised as a peace deal Zelensky proposes, Russia has the momentum to achieve its goal. That's once again, that's it. You can come up with all kinds of peace deals. I'll put it like this. You come up with a 20-point peace deal and the Russians will have artillery, and I'm going to bet on artillery every time. Quote, it's one thing to have leverage. It's another to watch as the territory you consider to be under your control shrinks, and there's nothing you can do about it. I think it should be clear to the Kiev regime that if they don't try to accept our terms now, the situation will rapidly deteriorate. Hence, the need to drag things out as long as possible, because as long as Zelensky remains in power, his thieving clique can continue to lap up Western money, including $90 billion in freshly promised aid, which still needs to be divided up, laundered, and stashed in offshore accounts. There you go. So that's the long and short of it. That's where we are right now. There's no honor amongst thieves. They're stealing everything they can. I think the Trump administration now, I will say this, after Alaska, we saw some interesting developments as Donald Trump came back from Alaska and said, I get it. We got to deal with the root causes. And then after talking to like the King of England and other people, all of a sudden he turned around and again, no, we've got to have a cessation of hostilities, right? Did you read the national security strategy? It basically uses the language of a ceasefire, cessation of hostilities. It didn't say end the conflict. It didn't say address the root causes. It didn't say no, don't set this aside. It said cessation of hostilities. That implies the only thing we want to do is stop the shooting. That's it. What do we need to do to stop the shooting? And the Russians are saying, yeah, I tell you what you need to do to stop the shooting. We're the same thing. The Russians are saying, we want a cessation of hostilities. We want to stop the shooting. Now, how we're going to get there is by addressing the root causes. So in a way, they're not far apart. The Europeans are saying, we want a cessation of hostilities. The Russians are saying, we want a cessation of hostilities. The Europeans are saying, we want a cessation of hostilities on our terms, to give us an opportunity to restart the hostilities at a later date. The Russians are saying, we want a cessation of hostilities on our terms that will prevent the resumption of hostilities at a future date, right? So they both want the same thing. The question is, How did they get there? And what do they want after the cessation of hostilities? A permanent cessation of hostilities versus a temporary cessation of hostilities. And adding this, a permanent cessation of hostilities that prevents it in the long run. The other word for that is a full spectrum defeat. You know what? We'll stop hostilities. I can tell you right now. Hey, the Russians want a cessation of hostilities. And what do they want? They want an unconditional surrender. That's one way to stop hostilities, an unconditional surrender, right? So my point being that the manner that the Russians want, the road, the avenue that they want to take to get to a safe cessation of hostilities is one that also amounts to a strategic defeat for NATO, which NATO's already dead, but which finishes off NATO, because at that point it becomes this. Number one, NATO is exposed as a fraud and a lie. NATO is also exposed that it's there to stop the Russians, but it can't stop the Russians because it's too weak to stop the Russians. And NATO is also exposed as something that's extremely detrimental to the economic health of the combined West. Now, David King, before we go, I was something, you know what? Great minds think alike, David King. Great minds think alike. Thank you very much. He read my mind, right? I was going to say this. So what does all of that mean? And where are we? And how do we end that? David King is a very smart man. And you know how what is eventually, right? You know, most people say, what is the definition of a smart man, right? A person who agrees with me. That's the way it usually works, right? In a nutshell, what David says is what I agree with. Right now, the EU reeks of desperation, and they are in deep and serious trouble. And so what does that mean? It's false flag time. You got it, David. That means now that the Trump administration has kicked out Kellogg, and I think to some extent, at least within Trump's inner circle, the fight between the Kellogg-Rubio regime and maybe the Tulsi Gabbard and what's his name, and Vance regime, who went out of this thing. For whatever reason, you can talk about why or what their next evil and diabolical deed may be, but they went out of this thing. I think the Vance Gabbard wing of Trump's inner circle have likely won, and out went Kellogg, right? And so now Trump seems to be more solidly in their camp. Trump is a wiggly dude. He's slick as a greased eel. He's a slippery fella, so he could do a reverse. But right now, he seems to be pretty solidly in the Vance Gabbard camp, right? Which means if you're Kaya Kallas and you're goose stepping all over Brussels, you got problems. If you're Starmer in the British Empire and you may be exposed as just a stinking weak little island with making a whole lot of noise and able to do all kinds of evil deeds using finances and using other stuff, but you don't really have any military horsepower, what you can do is a false flag. And even though it is maybe even unlikely to work, if you got no other choice, that's what you may do. So I think that just keep an eye out. I think the good thing is the Russian intelligence is really good, and they've called out a couple false flags here in the last couple months where one of the things they said was, hey, the Ukrainians are trying to get their hands on a bunch of radiation so they can do a dirty bomb and blame it on us, right? And so the Russians put that, as soon as they sniff that stuff out, they put it out there, and that stops them from doing it. So I think the Russian intel is on this stuff, and they're trying to sniff out any potential false flags, but that doesn't mean they ain't coming. So keep an eye out for false flags. And I think that's the long and short of it. Do we have any super chats? If we do, I'm going to mention them. I think we got a couple. I don't want to overlook our super chats. Let's start with Anissa Magnosia. Why doesn't Russia tell the U.S. to buzz off and end its op as desired? No gain for peace talks. U.S., EU, or foes, ignore them. Russia has a royal flush. Yes, but look, the Russians are very smart. They're very smart. And they understand that, look, when it comes down to it, when all this is over, there's 3 world powers. And it is in their best interest to have at least as good a relations as they can with the other 2, that we need to be as far as we can away from nuclear conflict. We need to be as far as we can away from conflict between these 2 nations. And here's what you have. The Russian leadership they're the adults in the room. Here's the reality. They are the adults in the room, and I think they're going to continue to be the adults in the room, and they're not going to act out of anger. I don't disagree with you, but I think they're professional diplomats, and they're going to continue to act like professional diplomats, and that's how a professional diplomat would act. All right. Ms. Dana 702 says CNN Finland had an article before Christmas. Santa's reindeer in threat of Russia's wolves. Russia hunters were at front line instead of killing wolves. Yeah, of course. And the Russians are eating each other. And I think we have to understand that's what we're going to get. We're going to get silliness. We're going to get foolishness, and we're going to get in the news, and we're going to get false flags. And we just got to accept it, that it is what it is. Let me also check Rumble, because we might have a Rumble rant. We might have ourselves a Rumble rant. All right. I don't see a Rumble rant, but a couple people have said things. So since I got no Rumble rant, I don't want to forget my Rumbles people. How many times is it going to be reported that Russia is on the verge of decisively winning this war? How many times does it have to be explained that Russian victory looks different from a Westerner's idea's victory? Led Zeppelin had a great song. How many more times? Kiev hiring a bunch of supposed politicians is basically the same as a pawn shop firing an assistant manager. Great stuff there. Great stuff. Don't forget AG and super bank protector man Eric Holder. He deserves some credit as a mascot as well. He coined the concept of systemically important institutions too. Thanks a lot over there. The people on Rumble are hilarious. And Christopher Dobby says, the mafia ain't magically disappearing. Is it true? No, it is not. Thanks a lot, everybody. I certainly appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy schedules to hang out with me. For those who are able to, by the way, first, thanks everybody who does the Patreon stuff, and I appreciate all my Patreons. Don't forget, buy me a coffee is certainly another option, and you can do buy me a coffee if you say I'm buying all of the coffee, $5, whatever the hell. I'm going to do it each, however many you want, but it'll also say, do you want to do it monthly or make it one-time donation? So buy me a coffee. If you don't like Patreon, buy me a coffee. Can do the same thing. Thank you for my PayPal friends, Cash App, everybody who donates to the channel, and of course, there's my PO box for those who wish to send something snail mail, whether it is a donation or just a letter or a book, all kinds of fun stuff. Somebody just sent me a bunch of great ties. How awesome is that? But thanks a lot, everybody. And don't forget, the most important thing you can do, because like old Mr. Al Go Rhythm is always giving me the shaft, right? So the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. I really do mean share this on X, share this on Facebook, share it on Telegram, wherever you can. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.